Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, as you will have seen, unemployment is at 5.2%, which is up 16,000 people in the last year. Predictably, Nicola Willis went straight to the press to try and claim that this was some kind of big success and that all the foundations were there. And she relied very heavily on Treasury and a forecast that was made back before her government came into power that suggested around about now unemployment would be around about 5.4%, but it was lower at 5.2%, and therefore she was claiming some kind of amazing victory today.
Treasury laid that out plainly in clear facts before the election. They said that unemployment would be peaking now, and it is of note that there are currently 8,000 fewer people unemployed than Labor was forecasting.
However, as those who follow politics closely know, Nicola Willis had also said that Treasury had got it wrong. They had got it so wrong when it came to GDP and growth. Last year, we went into a massive recession, and all Nicola Willis could say was Treasury could not be relied upon and got it wrong. But today, the very same Treasury and the very same kind of forecasts were suddenly correct.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does she stand by her statement yesterday, quote, the Treasury got its forecast before the election plain wrong, unquote? If so, why should the public believe future Treasury forecasts?
Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr. Speaker, yes, and I would note that a lot of other people were wrong too. To the second point, it's not a matter of belief. People can be guided by economic forecasts as they are by weather forecasts, but neither of these is a guaranteed thing. They are predictions of the future, not reality.
So she was cherry-picking and trying to fool New Zealanders that Treasury forecasts were wrong and right, the same forecasts. So which one was it? Predictably, nobody in the National Party and ACT Party-aligned press actually pressed Nicola Willis to kind of explain how Treasury could be both right and wrong about their forecasts at the same time. In addition, if you actually look at the other things that Nicola Willis was saying, she was saying that we've now got inflation under control, while inflation is now going back up.
Inflation has come back under control.
That didn't make sense, and of course nobody in the press challenged this. Nicola Willis went on to say that Trump's Liberation Day was in fact causing mayhem, and it wasn't her fault that we didn't have economic growth that had been promised so much by the National Party for the last 18 months.
We had the announcement of Trump's tariffs and the global volatility that ensued.
These kind of inconsistencies didn't escape most of you, and they didn't escape me either. Worse, Nicola Willis was clinging to a figure of 4.5% in wage growth.
The data shows that average hourly earnings rose 4.5% in the past year.
But as you know, and look at this graph, you can see that there are two measures of wages, and the National Party, they cling to the highest one when inflation is actually low, and they cling to the lowest one when inflation is high, in order to say that, well, wage growth is not keeping up with inflation when a Labor Party is in government. So today, conveniently, Nicola Willis was boasting about the top line, which had just levelled out recently, if you look at the graph, and saying, well, look, it's at 4.5%. But had she been consistent with what she was saying before she was elected into being the finance minister, she would have been pointing at the lower line, which was down under inflation, while inflation's at 2.7%. So these are the kind of crooked, inconsistent lies that Nicola Willis is trying to sell to the electorate, and it all passes most people in Dumbtown straight past them. They don't actually even know they're being lied to. And I think that the idea that you can lie blatantly and get away with it in front of the media has actually become accepted within the National Party. And we saw more of that kind of thing when Christopher Bishop sat in front of Jack Tame in the weekend and said, well, I had no foggy idea what party benefited from special votes, only to say a few seconds later that he knew that it was the left that always benefited from special votes. Of course, the same Chris Bishop wouldn't consider just letting the Electoral Commission hire more people to count the votes, but made out that it was the length of time it took to count the votes if you continue to sack people that count the votes, that meant that you had to gerrymander the electoral system and suppress about 100,000 votes in order for a National Party that's going down the drain to win. In other news today, we also saw Shane Jones mouthing off on Radio New Zealand, using terms like orgies and aphrodisiacs, which were kind of sexual in nature, to describe the way in which the fishing industry would now have longer limits to the way in which they could express a catch limit. Instead of it taking only 12 months, it would now be 24 months or 36 months before those limits would be changed. The rhetoric from Jones was really about how he didn't like NGOs and Greenpeace and people who cared about sustainable fishing actually criticising the fishing industry for its limits, and he wanted to make sure that if you extended those limits, well, more fish could be taken, more species could be threatened, and at the same time he didn't like transparency because you wouldn't be able to do an OIA request anymore on camera footage on those fishing boats. This lack of transparency was pretty typical of a New Zealand First who had Jones in there, who had himself been a chairman of Sea Lords and had all sorts of industry connections in the fishing industry. This kind of cronyism was backed up by Paul Goldsmith, who was making sure of an unnecessary law change to prevent valid claims of customary title for Maori who had actually had continuous occupation and practice and tradition, according to tikanga, of our foreshore and seabed, doing traditional fishing rights, because National Party people and New Zealand First people see this as kind of a obstruction to drilling and fishing and other industries that they themselves actually get paid big money from their donors to actually loosen all these laws up. So New Zealanders saw all that kind of crony behaviour and bad language from Jones for what it was. In addition, we had Nicole McKee freaking out because, like I said, with these right-wing parties going down the drain in the polls and there being so much pressure on them at the moment, we're seeing the leaks begin. And a draft cabinet paper got leaked this morning to Radio New Zealand, and Guyan Espion was talking to Ingrid Hipkiss about what was in those leaks, and it turned out there'd been a big U-turn by Nicole McKee, who had backtracked on her position around supermarkets and the amount of time that was available to sell alcohol. So now I think we're just basically seeing Nicole McKee refusing to front to the press and be transparent, throwing a big paddy, and there's going to be a cabinet meeting to try and kind of like ease through a bit of a U-turn on alcohol and selling alcohol, which is a big societal harm for all of us, but there's big money in the alcohol lobby, and these are the kind of politicians we've got in power that are ready to do the bidding of those people that will give their parties money. In further news, there's actually been some speculation about what the election will come down to next year. We had Chris Bishop refusing to actually talk about asset sales because National Party people do not wish to speak about their own policies for the election until next year, but at the same time are insisting that Labor reveal all of theirs now. So those kind of inconsistencies are there for all to see on Q&A, and Bishop was being tight-lipped, but you can be pretty sure that when you do give people a tax cut who are your donors like landlords, and then you don't have enough money and the economy is falling apart, that you're going to bring in asset sales like it's pretty much standard operating procedure from the National Party in the past. Then you look to sell off things and privatise. So we'll be seeing probably more asset sales next year, with the idea that we're not running them very efficiently and therefore we should sell them into private hands. And as you know, that means the price of everything goes up for public services. We've seen this in the electricity sector with huge, amazingly gargantuan power bills hitting all of us around the country right now. We're seeing the scrapping of Three Waters result in thousands and thousands of citizens having to pay enormous rates bills and being chased out of their very homes, and their comfortable lives are now being put under threat as the National Party and its terrible economic vandalism scrapping Three Waters results in massive rates increases as it tries to blame councils for things that don't really add up to rates increases like the four well-beings. So we're seeing this real dishonesty and transfer of blame. We're seeing this inconsistency from Nicola Willis about Treasury forecasts. We're seeing a whole bunch of numbers being cherry-picked and used selectively depending upon how it suits Christopher Luxon or Nicola Willis. Now, Christopher Luxon's out of the country as per usual, and when anything's going down, like, raising the threshold for Maori to actually make a valid claim to the seabed and foreshore, like we are here on Palm Beach on Waiheke Island on a stormy, fairly blustery day, we're actually seeing Christopher Luxon avoiding going to the Cook Islands and instead going to Papua New Guinea. Now, Audrey Young said that was perfectly valid, that you want to ignore our partners and not talk to them and, go do the silent treatment like a bunch of teenagers, to teach them a lesson that, with silent treatment, they shouldn't go breaking, our agreements to consult with us when it came to doing a deal with China. But ironically, of course, Winston Peters has actually been telling people not to talk to each other when it came to Trump, and that all resulted in an increase in tariffs. We've also seen Winston being one of the least likely person to talk when it comes to doing deals with people that behind the scenes, and then trying to make out that he hasn't actually done any pork barrel politics at all himself. So there was layers of irony to this, and Luxon was out of the country while everything was going to shit back here. Anyway, we also saw a bit of talk over at Newsroom from Ed Miller, who actually put up the data about our gentailers. Now, as you recall, Sir John, he was the guy that actually said, look, let's sell off half of these electricity providers. Contact Energy had already become fully privatised a couple of decades ago, but Meridian and Genesis and a couple of the others, they were all up for the slather. So they got half sold off, and as it turned out, Ed Miller said, well, look, this resulted in governments not being able to control anything anymore. The lack of control from governments about the price of electricity was gone as soon as you go into privatisation. And what he pointed out was that ever since privatisation back in around 2015 or so, what we saw was a complete lack of investment, capital investment in the infrastructure for electricity. And we saw at the same time a massive greedy dividend share being paid out to shareholders as public money went into the pockets of the private shareholders, and there was no investment in building up renewables or any other kind of infrastructure from all of the gentailers. So this was Sir John, this was his fans like Paul Henry and all of the other people that vote for National, and this is what they believe in, is that we shouldn't actually pay for investments into a renewable energy. We should just muck around, and then when time finally comes that we can't actually generate the electricity in a dry year, just blame an oil and gas ban. But that's a lie as well, as we have seen. The data shows that all of those oil countries were leaving New Zealand and packing up and going back to wherever they came from years and years before there was an oil and gas ban. But the dishonest New Zealand First narrative, the dishonest Simeon Brown, and the dishonest people in the ACT Party are all waxing on that this was all to do with a ban, which just wasn't true. It was totally dishonest. The Labour Party know this, but nobody in the press will report the lies, and we become used to being lied to all the time by the current government, as if it's okay to lie now. It's okay to just do fake news about the cause of those electricity increases, the lack of investment. And thank goodness for Ed Miller and Newsroom and a few other of these organisations that are prepared to put the facts to us all, so it will remind us of the dishonesty that's going on right now. So that's about all I had to say to you today, and I will speak to you again as soon as I can, maybe tomorrow. This is Palm Beach behind me. There's a long history here for me personally. I'll be appearing on Waiheke Radio over a cup of tea between 9 and 10 tomorrow morning. So for those of you who are resident on the island, you might hear me having a chat a little bit more about myself, who I don't talk about that often. But this is the place that I came when I was a kid for all of my summer holidays, and it's my tūranga waiwai. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.